Hello, my name is Ann Phelim.
And I'm Phelim Scoop.
And we're married. And this is the Ann Phelim Scoop. And it's also week 51 of the 2-week Flatten the Curve lockdown. We have 1 week left and it'll be the end of the year. And I just should say to all of the people who listen to this early part of the show very carefully, yes, I've sort of just lied. Because I think last week was actually week 48, according to our calculations.
Week 49.
Either way, I've skipped a week because I was doing this week by week, and of course, as many of you smart people know, there aren't always, 4 weeks is not a month.
Yes.
Calendar month.
Yes.
So anyway, let's bringing it all forward. In 1 week, next week is St. Patrick's Day. Next week is a year. Because last year we had St. Patrick's Day, and you and I, we had a party. Remember, we were going to have a party. Yeah. And we'd invited people. And in fact, people who were here at the weekend were people who had been invited.
And they reminded us.
They reminded us that they were then uninvited. Because as time moved on, closer and more information came out about the virus, etc., the Wuhan virus. We thought, you know what, we really can't invite anyone over here. It's not fair because people then would feel obliged to come and maybe wouldn't feel healthy and all of that. So we did not have a party on St. Patrick's Day. I think we may have to rectify that next week, Phelim.
Yes, perhaps. Yes.
So next
What's
week,
on the show today, Anne?
So, well, we've got a quick update on the Clarence Thomas documentary, and our quick update is that there is no update and that Amazon is still not streaming the Clarence Thomas documentary. They didn't stream it during Black History Month, and it's still not being streamed. And on top of that, they still haven't answered questions as to why they took down this documentary during Black History Month. And we have a crazy California story.
Many of them, in fact. So yes, while stores across California are shuttering for good, you'll never guess what the legislators in Sacramento are very, very busy doing and not helping. California is actually opening up, the last state in the union, and you know what? They're not even pretending anymore that it's anything to do with science. They're opening up, but it's hilarious. They're just giving up all pretense.
And we have Meghan and Harry Gate, and our resident UK citizen and very disloyal subject, Phelim Scoop, has an update.
Yes, indeed. You won't want to miss that. Neither will. I think Meghan and Harry will be watching.
Tuned in all the time.
Yeah. Well, probably lead a pretty boring life up in there. Anyway, what a horrible life they have. This week's interview, we talk to the wonderful Wesley Smith about the frightening, campaign to legalize, actually more normalize euthanasia, and what that means for vulnerable people near you.
And we have a postcard from listeners, our very loyal listeners in New Mexico, the Klaus family, who have been very long-standing residents of New Mexico, but are moving to Lubbock.
And very long-standing listeners to our show.
That's right. And they've just said enough is enough, and they have given us permission to read out their postcard.
And Andrew Cuomo, my part in his exoneration. Not really, but maybe.
And we have a delicious red lentil soup recipe that you would not want to miss. But it comes with a general cooking warning that is actually, I think it's it's kind of like it's like the test. Something happened in the test kitchen. Let's just say that I'm willing to share with others.
And I'm still bearing the.
But I'm sort of blaming you actually for this. I feel comfortable doing that. I'm going to find a reason to blame you for what happened.
I was the sous chef. I was only following orders.
You were the cameraman. And I think the camera had me spooked. Something happened anyway. Okay, Phelim, what crazy thing is happening in California?
California is there's a legislative bill that would ban boys and girls toy sections in big department stores, because that's really important right now.
It's incredibly important, yes. While large department stores and small businesses are being shuttered all over California, and
Bloomingdale's has just closed in Santa Monica.
And Sur La Table closed in Santa Monica at the end of 3rd Street Promenade. Really sad. You see these businesses that they're not closed. They are done. It's over. And Bloomingdale's, that's a huge store.
Well, Sur La Table, it was like a kind of a social centre.
Oh my God, it was lovely, and it was a busy, happening place. It was a gorgeous place. So this kind of stuff is happening.
And they didn't have horrible sales assistants like Williams-Sonoma in Montana.
On Montana Avenue, which Phelim obviously has an issue with, which we both have an issue with, let's be honest about that. But however, the main thing is that while these awful tragedies for businesses all over the state of California and all over the United States and all over the world, by the way, while all of that's happening, the legislators in Sacramento have really gotten to grips with what really matters to them. So they're really concerned that boys and girls' toys wouldn't be identified as boys or girls. Anyway, this story was in the LA Times, but I think when you read the story, I don't know if you felt the same thing, Phelim. I felt that it wasn't really about boys and girls' toys. It was basically about anything that might identify boys and girls as different. That was the heart of the legislation. They've actually had to root that piece out. But basically, they wanted to get rid of anything that would be labelled boy or girl, because of course, according to our better offs and our better ups and the higher ups and the experts in California, children, are grappling with their identity when they're 3 and 4 and 6.
No, they want children to grapple with their identity. That's why they want to get rid of genders in toy shops, because they want children to have to think about their gender, and they want this confusion, and then they want to give them puberty blockers when they're 9.
Yeah, yeah.
So more crazy California. Gavin Newsom is opening baseball parks and theme parks in April. Just weeks after saying that it will be middle summer or September because of the science and because of COVID. And basically, what's happened is that the Recall Gavin Newsom campaign looks like it's got enough signatures to recall Gavin Newsom, and he's feeling the political pressure and the coward that he is. Who knows? I mean, he never believed the science. He was just using it to exercise power, and now he's realizing this is costing him. And even George Skelton, a columnist for the LA Times, can you imagine if Trump did this? Put all these people at risk. People, letting them into baseball stadiums. But he's quite open about it.
This guy, what?
Yeah, George Skelton. Saying? Well, a few worriers might fret about baseball crowds becoming super spreaders of COVID-19. Just as the
baseball crowds.
Yeah, just as the germ is retreating from steadily increasing vaccinations. A few worriers. Like I thought that was we were all supposed to be.
Oh, a few worriers we're called now.
Yes.
Well, I'm not a worrier, but a few worriers might fret.
Yes.
God, that's a very different tone.
Very dismissive, isn't it?
Oh, yeah,
of people with genuine concerns. The concerns, by the way, that you in the media have been pushing for a year when Trump was in power and when Gavin Newsom looked good closing all the things. Now it's coming back to bite him. You're dismissing people who worry about the science as a few worriers.
And can we just take one moment and stop here for a moment? I want to show a little tiny piece of video right now. I want to show, this occurred to me yesterday. We had a lunch with some friends yesterday, and this just occurred to me yesterday, and I said it. And once I said it, I was thinking, oh, I'm very wise. I think Gavin Newsom may not be a person at all. I think he might be an AI. Just look at this guy. If this isn't what a person, if you were thinking of an artificial intelligence, right, that he's a kind of a fake, what's it called?
Deep fake.
That he's a deep fake, right? That someone somewhere put him together at a computer station. Somebody was designing on a computer, and somebody said to them, design a politician for a B movie. Design kind of one of those politicians you have where there's going to be a disaster, there's going to be an emergency, and then you have this sleazy politician type.
Not doing the right thing.
But
the guy who was fired from his job in New York and who's come to Alabama now with this fancy New York ways says, if you don't do this, everyone's going to die. And the politician goes, we don't need your New York ways here.
Have a look at this guy for a second.
We can announce today that over 210,000 educators have been a beneficiary and have received a vaccine. 210,224 to be exact. So we significantly outperformed our minimum benchmark.
Seriously? Is that guy not like some kind of carbon cutout?
Max Headroom.
Yeah, Max Headroom. He does seem like, so he might actually be computer generated. There's a computer generated feel to him. Moving on, Phelim, sorry.
So moving on to the next. Oh, Meghan and Harry get.
Phelim. So Phelim, as a disloyal subject of the British Empire, what was your? So can I first of all make a confession that I had said and really proudly strutted around all weekend saying I'm not going to watch Harry and Meghan. I object to this. I think this is really horrible and sort of like the Roman circus or some version of that. I wasn't going to watch it. Guess what I did last night? Now, by the way, the only reason I did was because you forced it on me, Phelim. So we watched Harry and Meghan. What's your take, Phelim?
I have many takes. I mean, the usual thing, you're not a journalist if you allow people. Now, we interview people here, and sometimes we allow them to say things. You can't pick up on everything, right? You can't. But by the way, Oprah had an unlimited time, an unlimited budget, and as we've seen, the longer the interview is, the more money they're going to make. It was originally a 2-hour long interview, and then they realized, we can actually extend this out to 3 hours. And they did. So she has but I mean, so much of this is lies, actually, and it's fake. You know, just remember she said, you know,
remember who said?
Meghan said, I was driving to meet, first time I was meeting the Queen, and Harry said to me, you realise you'll have to curtsy. And she goes, oh, I'll have to curtsy? I never knew that. What's that? Well, I never knew that. And it's like, who knows, who doesn't know they have to curtsy to the Queen? Like, no, it doesn't mean you know how to curtsy. What is it, a bow? What's a curtsy? And Oprah, fair play to her, says, well, did you Google it? She goes, no, I was in the car. I'm going, like, what, your phone doesn't work in the car?
Right, you don't have a mobile phone, yeah.
Your phone doesn't work in the car. Like, I mean, and you know, so then she gets there. And by the way, you know, what person who's introducing their girlfriend or their fiance to their parents or to their grandparents doesn't say something like, well, my grandfather, you'll have to listen to his war stories, right? Or he'll talk about piping, right? Or
don't mind him, he's blind or whatever.
Yeah, or he'll talk about quadratic equations, or he was a school teacher and he'll tell you stories about the guy who used to teach us now, a Hollywood star, and it's the same boring story. They'll tell you about the quirks of the people you're about to meet, and you know, just nod. You know, the idea that Harry wouldn't have told her that she has to curtsy to the Queen is ludicrous. The idea that she couldn't Google it in the car is ludicrous.
But she also claimed, by the way, that she never Googled Harry. She never looked him up online to see what people said about him, whatever. I mean, even ordinary girls now do be Googling about boys they've met, right? And looking on the Facebook to see if there's any scandal or whatever about them.
It's irresponsible.
The absolutely most ordinary person has done that. So I find it, I really fail to believe for a millisecond that she didn't do that.
Yes. So anyway, basically the interview was you know, the royals seem to have gone from let them eat cake to having your cake and eating it.
Boom, boom. Very good film. Like that one. Move on. Yes.
Yeah, okay. It took me all of yeah, okay. So yes, I mean, I don't buy the she made a lot about her being treated differently because she's a person of color and her child. This was the bombshell for me, was, you know, that someone in the royal family expressed concern about the shade of color her child would be, Archie. And it's like, first of all, does anyone look at Meghan Markle and say she's African American? Maybe they do, but
I think you have to be reminded a lot.
I look at her and I think she's Meghan Markle. I'd never think that she's African American. And would anyone then look at her child and say that child's African American?
So that child would be what, 1/8?
One quarter African American.
1/4 after African American.
Is it 1/4? Yeah. So, and second of all, I'm not buying her premise. I just don't think anyone in the royal family said that, expressed any concern about the child being a person, as she called it, a person of colour. I'm just not buying it. And in fact, any sensible member of the royal family would be excited because, you know, the royal family needs mindless publicity. Not, you know, it needs to be kept in the eye, but it doesn't need to be probed too deeply. And having an African American great grandchild would be a boon, and they're smart enough and savvy enough to know it. I'm just not buying it. And third of all, and whatever of all, name the person.
Yeah, it's a really horrible thing to do. So she basically has.
She slandered everyone. That was the classic.
No, she slandered everyone.
That's the classic thing about journalism. Was we were told at journalism colleges, don't think that by refusing to name someone, you escape liability for slander. Well, so it was always this thing, if you say a police officer from a police station beat me up, if it's a small police station, there's only 12 officers, every police officer there can then sue you because their friend said, oh, it must have been you.
Okay.
So the royal family is very small.
But the royal family are not, so they basically can't sue her for what she said. But they should. Or they could sue Oprah, by the way, for broadcasting it. Take the $12 million or $9 million.
They won't do that. But you know, the royal family, they're never done. I mean, they've got a thing called the Commonwealth, right? And since you people left it, Anne, you know.
I don't believe we were ever in the Commonwealth, were we?
I think probably the Commonwealth started after you people left.
Us people. Thank you. Moving on.
And from the
Have you anything else to say about
well,
Meghan?
actually, then she says, oh, well, Archie was denied his princehood, right? And this is complicated, but it's not that complicated. Archie was never entitled to a princehood. It's only the grandsons of a monarch that are entitled to a princehood. And he's the great-grandson of a monarch.
Yes.
When Charles ascends to the throne, he is entitled... He was entitled to be an earl, right? And at the time, and I remember this well, and I've just looked back, and it was all over the newspapers, including The Guardian, they had declined the use of an earldom because they wanted their son to be normal. And that is such a woke, stupid virtue signaling thing to do, but that's what they did. And
now they've segued from saying that to suddenly now saying that actually they were denied it from the higher ups.
Yes, and they were denied it, but they sort of conflate the two, which always is a sign that people are lying. They were saying he was denied the princehood because of racism. Well, no, he was denied the princehood because he wasn't entitled to it, and they have kind of strict rules in the royals. And then they're saying our decision not to accept the earldom was not our decision; it was the palace's decision. Again, at the time, that was not what you said. True sources. So they do want their cake and eat it, and. It makes all the sense in the world that they were virtually signaling at the time, and now to play this race card, it's
very unfair.
It's very, very unfair. And then they also conflate this. Well, we only want the title because of security. Look, that might work in the world, right? But anyone who knows anything about these royal security or even presidential security situations is that it doesn't depend on your title. It depends on the risk threat, right? A threat, they make an assessment of how dangerous it is to be the son of Joe Biden or the grandson of Joe Biden or the sister of Joe Biden or the sister of the Queen or the son of the Queen or the uncle of the Queen. And where you are and how public your life is and where you live too. Do you live, close to dangerous places? So they make these risk assessments, and they're constantly assessing the risk assessments.
So they downgraded his risk assessment when he went to Vancouver. Is that what you're saying?
No. They're saying that Archie, because he wasn't going to be a prince, would not get protection. But of course, he was going to get protection because his father was protected, right? So he was going to get protection until he's 18. Probably, the protection has got nothing to do with your title. It's got everything to do with your risk, right? So, so again, that's an untruth, but they were allowed to say it because it sounded good. Now, Oprah doesn't have to be an expert on security protocols, but she is actually, because she knows the president, and there's always, these people always do make this scandal, oh, the Bush daughters have got protection whilst at university. And remember that, and and it was like, look, these are all very serious people. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be political interference. And normally the political interference is, oh, my sister wants it, can you help her? And it's basically a full-time driver for you and your family, right? But it is abused, but it's abused in the width of it, not in the narrowing of it. So again, more disinformation, more fake news.
I thought one of the things we were sort of talking about last night that I thought was interesting was, she had this whole thing, which I thought was extraordinary, where they said, oh, actually, by the way, and when you saw the wedding, well, actually, no, we got married secretly 3 days before, yes, in a private ceremony with the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Because we wanted it for ourselves.
Because we wanted it for ourselves. I'm thinking, why didn't you choose Father Joe Smo from down the road then, rather than the Archbishop of Canterbury? However, the other thing that I thought was interesting was she was trying to, we just wanted to be ordinary, just ordinary people and all that kind of thing. So we know, or you have this very distinct memory. I don't remember this, but I think you're obviously right. George Clooney and Amal Clooney were invited to the wedding, and apparently, according to George Clooney at the time, he had never met them before. So it's like, you're really ordinary there, Meghan, but you're inviting absolute strangers to your wedding. And she made this whole thing about the wedding itself, really should have been about them, and that's why they got married 3 days before in the garden, because really it was for the world. Well, now, who was it for to invite George Clooney to your wedding there, Meghan? A guy you've never met before. Who was asking for that? Was the Queen asking for that? Was she the big one? She was hoping to meet up with George Clooney, was it? Do you think it was herself that was
maybe she wants a cameo in Ocean's 19 or something.
There's always that.
As the crime boss, the Queen.
So we're going to go now to the interview we did earlier with Wesley Smith, who is one of the world experts on euthanasia and the normalization and the legalization of euthanasia, the creep of euthanasia around the world.
Euthanasia creep.
And I met Wesley at a conference, a pro-life conference in Oregon, I don't know, a few years ago, and I was very impressed. And it was interesting because I think at pro-life conferences, there's a lot of talk about abortion, an enormous amount of talk about abortion, and very little talk about euthanasia, which is obviously, you know, the other side of the pro-life story that needs to be given much more attention. So just one thing we want to mention, we had a technical issue earlier when we were talking to Wesley. So unlike our normal interviews where you get to see Wesley, you won't get to see Wesley on this occasion, but we're going to have Wesley back, by the way.
Yes.
So we have a static image of Wesley, but obviously just because we had a technical issue. But then you get
the interview is fantastic.
You get to look at us more, which is obviously a treat. And for those of you listening, you won't notice the difference at all.
Yes.
So one thing we do want to say just before we go over to the interview with Wesley is that this is very disturbing and will be very upsetting for certain people. So please, you know, take that warning to heart. It's
the truth. It's the truth about how vulnerable people are being treated, and in not just America, but actually especially in Europe. It's disturbing, and it could be disturbing for some people. So bear that in mind as you listen to this.
We're now joined by Wesley Smith, our friend Wesley Smith, who has had a fascinating journey from collaborating with arch-leftist Ralph Nader back in the day to becoming the most recognized anti-euthanasia advocate probably on the planet. I first met Wesley at a pro-life conference in Oregon. Do you remember that, Wesley?
I do.
And I've been a big follower of yours and a big supporter of yours ever since. Wesley is a lawyer, he's an award-winning author. He's a senior fellow at the Discovery Institute Center on Human Exceptionalism. In 2008, he won, the Human Life Foundation named him a great defender of life for his work against assisted suicide and euthanasia. He is the author of a number of books on euthanasia, including Forced Exit, I think that's an incredible title, by the way. Forced Exit, Euthanasia, Assisted Suicide, and the New Duty to Die. And his most recent book is The Culture of Death, the Age of Do Harm Medicine. I love that, Do Harm Medicine. Welcome to the Ann Phelim Scoop, Wesley.
Thanks, good to see you guys.
Yeah, it's great to have you here.
And I first met Wesley at a global warming conference in UCLA.
Yes.
That's correct. Right.
That's a few days ago.
That's a few days ago.
Yeah, it was a bit ago. Yes.
Yeah, that's the not even just wrong times.
Yes.
And Wesley criticized you for the title.
Yes. Why did we invite him on the show then? I don't do criticism.
I wanted to ask you first of all, Wesley, about something that you wrote recently that actually was republished as the last published Limbaugh letter, where you wrote about Rush Limbaugh's attitude to his diagnosis and his attitude to death and how he proceeded.
Yeah, you know, I have listened to Rush since, the late 80s, early 90s. And when I disagreed with him and when I agreed with him, I always thought he was great radio. And it never really occurred to me to write about him. But after he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, I noticed that he was attacking his show with even greater vigor than before, and that he was really standing tall and courageously and with great valor in the face of obviously a very difficult time. He continued on with his show. He never felt sorry for himself. He never moaned. He never complained. I mean, it's a devastating, catastrophic experience, and yet Rush showed that even when you are in a dying stage of your life, it's not dead, it's still living. And he kept on with his show. And I was thinking about what a contrast that is to these days when somebody receives that kind of a diagnosis, how quickly media and others may start to talk about assisted suicide, as if assisted suicide is the courageous way out, as opposed to what Rush Limbaugh did. And I also brought up in the piece, some of our viewers may remember Michael Landon, the TV star, who was Little Joe when I was a kid on Bonanza and became Pa on Little House on the Prairie and an angel on Highway to Heaven. He was an A-list, I mean, a very popular television star. And in the early 90s, he came down with a terminal diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. And way back in those days, often when somebody received that kind of a diagnosis, they went and hid in their rooms. But Michael Landon went on the Tonight Show and told Johnny Carson, who was then at the height of his popularity, about the terminal diagnosis. And it was such I think, a wonderful and uplifting thing for the entire country that he would do that and tell the message to other people similarly situated. Look, we're still alive. Let's fight. Let's go. And he received great plaudits in the country for the way he stood up to terminal illness and kind of led the way on how to do that in a manner that bespeaks of a good and strong human heart. And I thought Rush Limbaugh was doing that too, but not getting the credit, perhaps because of his politics, or perhaps because the culture doesn't value that as much anymore. And I thought I needed to say something, which I did. And again, I was really humbled that Rush saw it and liked it a lot and put it in the last newsletter published before he died.
What brought you? I mean, I think it's a really beautiful piece, and I think you're right that a lot more should have been made of it. I mean, that's why when I read that piece, I just thought this is great because no one else had said that, and it's such a great point. What brought you to? I mean, you're this like world expert now on euthanasia. I mean, it's kind of weird, right? And I know you've said that to me before. How you even look back and think, how did I get here? But you actually have a very particular story that brought you into thinking and writing and making this a massive part of your life, this whole euthanasia story.
Yeah, and I think anybody who gets in the euthanasia issue, whether it's on the pro or anti side, tend to have a personal story that brought them there, and that's certainly true of me. Back in 1992, I was writing books, as you mentioned in the introduction, with Ralph Nader. And I was really thrilled because Ralph had been my hero when I was a teenager. He had broken through, as you may recall, with his auto safety book, Unsafe at Any Speed, and General Motors had tried to destroy him. You know, this huge company against this one guy who was really not connected at all. He was just, in fact, I've talked to Ralph. He to write Unsafe at Any Speed, he actually hitchhiked down from Connecticut and lived in the YMCA in Washington, D.C. to do his research. And when Ralph found out that General Motors had actually tried to set him up with prostitutes and other things to try to destroy his reputation, he sued. And some of your older viewers will remember how he suddenly burst onto the scene. He was on television. He got about $600,000 from General Motors, and they thought he would just go away and take the money and run. And instead, he set up the consumer advocacy industry with General Motors money, which was, I think, very ironic. And Ralph, the reason he was my hero was here was this individual standing up against powerful forces because of what he thought was right. And I was so honored later in life, never dreaming when I was a teenager that he and I would become co-authors. That I was able to work with him and become his friend, and I'm still his friend. And as we were writing what turned out to be our last book, I had a friend named Frances. And Frances was an elderly woman. I say that a little with trepidation now because I'm beginning to approach where she was.
Yes, yes.
But she killed herself on her 76th birthday. And what was so odd about that was that her friends, myself included, had worked really hard to try to keep her in life. She was a very depressed woman. She was depressed because her husband had left her for a younger woman. She'd gone from having upper middle class gentility to living in a rent-controlled apartment. And she was really depressed, and she had difficult family issues. And her friends were continually holding interventions, trying to keep her in life. And yet, she killed herself, and I was so upset about it. I contacted her executrix, and I said, please send me Frances's suicide file. I knew she'd have a suicide file because she's still the most organized person I've ever met. And so the executrix found the file, sent it to me, and it was filled with this awful literature called the Hemlock Quarterly, which was a newsletter then published by the Hemlock Society when it was more honestly named. Today, that Hemlock Society is called Compassion and Choices because euthanasia activists love their euphemisms. In it were these letters, and what they did is they gave the reader moral permission to commit suicide, taught them how to do it with the type of drugs that would should be taken. I remember there was a list with toxicity 1 to 5. There was actual proselytizing for suicide. And the one that still sticks in my mind, this is, remember, I saw this literature back in 1992. The story that stuck in my mind, and this is a quote, is, quote, "My loved one laughed and giggled and seemed to relish the experience." And that sound you heard was my head exploding. We were talking about suicide. And they also taught readers how to use a plastic bag over their head to make sure they died, which is precisely how Frances killed herself.
Oh,
and I was so upset about this. You know, here Frances had friends who loved her, who were trying to keep her in life.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I called them the whisperers. We're whispering, in a sense, suicide is good. Suicide is empowering.
Yeah.
And so I wrote this piece in Newsweek magazine that came out in June of '93 called The Whispers of Strangers. And it's available online if anyone wishes to read it. Just type in Google Wesley J. Smith, Whispers of Strangers. It'll come right up. And I warned about this movement that I thought was victimizing people like Frances, making her think it was very romantic and empowering to commit suicide. And then I warned about future prospects if this thing continued. I was just thinking logically.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I thought could occur is that once we decided that assisted suicide or euthanasia was good, well, why not get the organs of people who have killed themselves? And I called it, there would be organ harvesting as a plum to society was the term I used. Well, the hate mail came rolling in from all directions. I thought what I wrote was non-controversial. I mean, I was raised with the idea that euthanasia was evil. But I received about 150 letters from that piece. And this, by the way, was back in the time when you had to actually put a pen to paper or a typewriter to paper.
Buy a stamp.
Buy a stamp. I mean, you paid for the honor of telling somebody you hope they die and get cancer, right? And so I received about 150 letters. And about 125 or so of them were basically, what Frances did was noble, what Frances did was good. I hope you suffer. You were a terrible friend. You know, may you rot in hell, this kind of thing. I'm sure you've received some of that kind of mail.
Tuesday then.
Yes, yeah. And I thought to myself, good grief. When did my culture change and where was I when that happened?
Yeah.
And I started to think more deeply about the issue. I thought it was going to be a one-off. I didn't think as I said, what I wrote was controversial at all.
Yeah.
And I was contacted by a group called the International Anti-Euthanasia Task Force, which is now called the Patients' Rights Council. And they wanted to reprint my piece. And I talked to them on the phone and I said, are you aware that these people, and they were saying, yes, Wesley, we know. I said, but do you know that? They said, yes, Wesley, we're aware of that. Yes, we know.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, you know, I've got some skills perhaps they could use. You know, I was a writer, a talking head on TV and radio. I had been a lawyer. Please don't hold that against me. And so I offered to give 10% of my time. And they started sending me all these, and it was coming in the mail, again, because we didn't have the internet the way we do now. But every couple of days, I'd get a package filled with clippings, and I started to read up on what was really happening. And I became very alarmed, and I offered my time, and then pretty soon it was 20%, 30%, then it was 50%, at which point Ralph said to me, you know, Wesley, why are you doing euthanasia instead of our work? And I explained it to him, and he totally agreed with me. And he said, yes, you go do that, because that's what Ralph did. Ralph basically mentors people, and then they go out and they tackle the issues that they think are important. And so I went out and I started doing this work.
Yeah, I mean,
and that led to the books, and here I am.
But I mean, your original article was the Whispers of Strangers. Is that right?
The Whispers of Strangers.
I mean,
I depicted the euthanasia people as these whisperers whispering in her ear.
I mean, the thing now is we've moved from the whispers of strangers to the shouts of strangers. I mean, back then it was this underground movement that now it's in the culture, it's in the legislature. It's you know, it's as you say, it's shouted from the rooftops rather than
it is, and it's extolled. And you may remember Brittany Maynard. Yes. And Brittany Maynard was a very beautiful young woman, very tragically afflicted with brain cancer. And she became world famous not because, like Rush Limbaugh and Michael Landon, she stood saying, okay, I'm going to fight to the end, but rather she said, I'm going to commit assisted suicide. And she moved to Oregon, and Compassion and Choices found out about her, and she was, of course, willing participant, and they decided to make her the poster woman of euthanasia because she was young and beautiful, and it was a tragic circumstance. And CNN and other media jumped on it, and People magazine, and she was named actually the Extraordinary Woman of 2014 by CNN. Wow. Because she killed herself. And People magazine, that had written a very powerful and strong endorsement of the courage of Michael Landon, wrote, I believe it was 1,800 words, obituary of Brittany Maynard about how this was courage. She climbed Mount Himalaya and then the mountain in Africa, and had traveled the world, and she was courageous. And then she committed assisted suicide. How valorous! And this was the same People magazine that had only 20 years previously been very complimentary of Michael Landon. And so you can see that the culture has changed. You see it in television shows. The media doesn't even really present anti-euthanasia perspectives at all anymore when they do stories. It's just a given that this is death with dignity. As if when my father died of cancer in 1984 in hospice, he didn't die in a dignified manner. As if my mother, when she died in my home in 2016 of Alzheimer's disease, and my wife and I took her in for the last 5 months of her life and cared for her with the help of hospice, as if that wasn't dignified. I resent the idea that dignified is taking poison or is being given a lethal jab.
It's interesting when you mentioned, I think it'd be good and useful at this point, you mentioned Oregon, which is where you and I met. And I think the reason that you were asked to go to Oregon was that Oregon has some really horrible laws where euthanasia is legalized. Can you just bring us up to speed a little on the American situation legally with euthanasia right now, and maybe even a little tour around the world, because I know you're also writing about what's happening in Europe particularly.
Right, the cancer is metastasizing. In the United States, assisted suicide is legal in 8 states by legislation. And that is where a doctor will prescribe a lethal overdose, meaning the drugs that are prescribed, they always call it medication, but it's not medication, it's poison. Mm-hmm. The idea isn't to treat pain or to alleviate symptoms. The idea is to cause death. That's poison. It's a poisonous overdose. And that is prescribed supposedly if you've got 6 months or less to live, although there are plenty of cases where people lived a couple of years after receiving a prescription, and of course nothing is ever done about it. So Oregon was the first. It legalized assisted suicide in 1994. And since then, you've got California, as you know, mm-hmm. Hawaii, Washington State, Colorado, Vermont, Maine, New Jersey. I think those are the states that have legalized it with legislation, plus the District of Columbia. And it's constantly being pushed, like in New Mexico, Connecticut, New York, and so forth, on a continual basis, because George Soros gives millions and millions of dollars to that cause, to Compassion and Choices, as do other foundations, progressive political foundations, who think this is just a great progressive cause. But it's very interesting that the most dynamic and I think effective opponents of assisted suicide in the United States are the disability rights activists, because they see themselves as the targets, which they are. You know, and disability rights activists tend to be part of the liberal coalition. They tend to be pro-choice on abortion. They tend to be very secular in their outlook, not religious. And they tend to be very liberal politically. And yet they are fighting, as they should, against this legalization. Another great opponent of assisted suicide was the late civil libertarian and left-winger Nat Hentoff, who was a self-described atheist. He wrote for The Village Voice for 50 years. He and I, one of the great joys of my life is he and I became very good friends, because he used me as a source in his work, and then he and I became very good pals. And he also received, by the way, the Great Defender of Life Award from the Human Life Foundation for his work involving pro-life issues. And it's quite a remarkable thing. Now, around the world, it's even worse, because in this country, there's still a dynamic give and take, and the country has not swallowed the hemlock, if you will. And so the activists try to go slow and pretend this is just a teensy weedy meeny tiny little change in ethics, when it's actually as radical as it gets, because you're saying killing is an acceptable answer to human suffering. And once you say that, terminal illness has nothing to do with it, because there are a lot of people who suffer for a far longer period and with more pain and suffering than people with terminal illnesses. And that's the logic where we've gone. So lethal injection euthanasia is legal in the Netherlands. It's legal in Belgium. It's legal in Luxembourg. It was just legalized in Spain, and it's legal in Canada. And by the way, in those countries, in Canada, Netherlands, and Belgium, they have conjoined euthanasia with organ harvesting, as I predicted. And in Belgium and in Netherlands, many of the people who are killed and harvested are not physically ill in the sense of having cancer, but are mentally ill.
I seem to remember there was an alcoholic
you've had alcoholics. You've had in Belgium. There's this, transgenderism is in the news, but there was this person with transgenderism, gender dysphoria, had a sex change operation, transition, and was so unhappy with the outcome that the answer for this person was euthanasia, which is just despicable. There was a woman in Belgium who had been sexually predated in this age of where we're more concerned about that, as we should be, by her own psychiatrist at the Me Too time. And the psychiatrist, she reported the psychiatrist for sexually predating her and taking advantage of her, and nothing was done about it. And so she went to another psychiatrist, and his treatment was euthanasia. I mean, it just drives you up a wall. And yet the media acts like this is so compassionate.
So I read somewhere, tell us about the statistics. What percentage of deaths in places like Netherlands are now euthanasia, pre-planned, Granny, we're going to kill Granny on Friday.
Or a 14-year-old, by the way.
Yes, well, there's no age limits in the Netherlands now. There's no age limits in Belgium now. Belgium has admitted to a 9-year-old being euthanized. In the Netherlands, infanticide is conducted, where babies born with serious disabilities or with terminal conditions are lethally injected in their bassinets. And there's even a bureaucratic checklist for which babies can be killed called the Groningen Protocol, Groningen Protocol. In terms of percentages, it kind of depends on how you define the terms. But there's something else that Dutch doctors do that is not technically euthanasia. It's called terminal sedation. And the reason they do that is that if they're going to euthanize somebody, they actually have to be present under Dutch law. They have to give the lethal injection, and they have to stay while the patient dies. And that's a very stressful thing, even for euthanasia death doctors. Terminal sedation, what they do is they put somebody who may not be dying, by the way, they put them in an artificial coma, and then they deny food and water to that person because they're unconscious, they can't eat or drink, they don't use a feeding tube. And over 10 to 14 days, terminal sedation, the patient dehydrates to death. That has to be, by the way, distinguished from palliative sedation, which is a proper approach where somebody who is in a terminal condition, and if a symptom cannot be adequately controlled, they can put somebody in a sedated state, they can titrate and so forth. And in those circumstances, the person dies of the illness, and it's only for a short time. It's not being dehydrated to death. If you include terminal sedation with lethal injection euthanasia, and with what they call termination without request or consent, which is non-voluntary euthanasia, but they don't even call it euthanasia, then the statistics I've worked up, and I wrote a piece on National Review about this, is 20 to 25%
of all deaths.
Of all deaths, but that includes the terminal sedation. If you don't include the terminal sedation, it's probably 5 to 8% of all deaths are lethal injection. But remember that about half the deaths don't involve end of life or that kind of medical treatment. Somebody gets hit by a truck or something. So, but there are thousands of people every year killed in the Netherlands and other countries that if it was the United States would be 50 or 60,000 a year if you had
it's an amazing way the progressive mind works. I mean, you have people like Chrissy Teigen,
yes.
you know, who's a big,
married to John Legend, right?
And you know, she had a miscarriage and wrote about it in huge detail about the pain that she suffered. But she's a huge pro-choicer in terms of abortion, pro-abortion. You know, and in places like Philadelphia and many states, in fact, like 9 states, you can have an abortion up to 9 months. Philadelphia, you can have an abortion after 24 weeks. I mean, at 24 weeks, a baby can be born alive and thrive. But the progressive mind seems to think that you can mourn a baby from a miscarriage, but celebrate the same age baby that's killed in an abortion. And similarly, you have all these people, a lot of progressive actually, you know, we need to crack down on elder abuse and laws preventing elder abuse. Our seniors are particularly vulnerable to manipulation, and they are, right?
Of course,
and you know, people can come in and manipulate and twist and turn and get them to hand over their money and isolate them from their family. They recognize that they're a uniquely vulnerable group of people, and at the same time, they say these same people though can go in and legally persuade them that euthanasia is the only solution to their problems. When it's actually,
I call this euthanasia world. And the other issue is HMOs, health maintenance organizations, where people on the hard left will often say, look, you know, these people make money, HMOs, from reducing levels of care, not providing care because it's no longer fee for service. And we'll hear about the abuses of the healthcare system and how doctors don't treat vulnerable people, how people of color, which is true, don't receive adequate medical treatment often in terms of access to healthcare. And again, the elder abuse issue, as you mentioned, and then they say, well, let's talk about assisted suicide. Suddenly every doctor is just is Marcus Welby, MD, I'm dating myself, but a perfect, you know,
George Clooney.
Exactly right. Yes.
Even
and
you're dating yourself there, Phil.
Every family is deep in loving, and the issues of elder abuse and inadequate access to proper health care and being pressured into dying because of
money.
Potentially money, inheritance, those go away. And they act as if the world is this beautiful, pristine place where everybody has nothing but good faith. And it's baloney. But the media go along with it all the time. The media promote this. Hollywood promotes it.
Yes. Oh, they bully you. That's really what's.
That's funny. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's actually what got me thinking about getting in touch with you, because, you know, we watch, I have to, you know, confess, we watch quite a lot of, you know, medical procedurals are a kind of our guilty pleasure, you know, or used to be our guilty pleasure until recently, when it's all gone very woke. And there's a recent show on NBC, and it's called Transplant. Now, Phelim, I have a question for you, which has just occurred to me. I'm questioning, is it set in Canada?
No, it's...
Because this is the question for Wesley.
Yes,
I think it's
well,
set in
it's
Canada.
one of those Canadian shows that tries to pretend it's set in America. It doesn't really tell you where it is set, you know. There's a few other, but it was made in Canada.
So it's made in Canada. You'll understand why I'm saying that, given what Wesley has just said there.
Yeah.
Where and we can show a clip from this now. I mean, it's an extraordinary story, and we'll explain what we're looking at after we've watched this.
You're a man of instinct. I know you can make hard choices and save lives. But that's not what you've been asked to do here.
Okay, Wesley, what we just saw there was a not very elderly lady, by the way, not very elderly lady who ends up in hospital, and it turns out that she has tried to kill herself by not eating and taking some drugs or whatever, and she hoped the cleaner would find her on Monday. And her daughter, who is there, is absolutely shocked. Why would you do this? What is wrong? Why won't you come to me? What happened? And the mother's reason for this is that, you know, I'm old now. Everything hurts, right? So that's the setup, Wesley. That was a setup.
Correct.
How does this get resolved, Phelim?
Well, eventually the daughter is bullied by the hospital staff into accepting,
into understanding
and being
there for her mother.
Being there for when her mother is killed by the
hospital, and the hospital administrator and all of the staff, all the higher ups in the hospital who know better, all the really compassionate people are saying, you bad daughter.
Yeah, you're cruel.
You cruel bad daughter. Now listen to your mother and be nice to your mother. And I just thought, when I saw it, I thought, God, we have to talk to Wesley about what's going on in Hollywood on this story.
Yeah, well, and I saw the episode, and they used the buzzwords, I want to die on my own terms, and this kind of thing. Understand that this idea of starving yourself to death, elderly people doing it, is promoted by Compassion and Choices and other assisted suicide advocates. They call it voluntary stop eating and drinking. It's called VSED. And it is aimed at, if people went to the Compassion and Choices website, they have articles aimed at senior citizens who are not dying, but who may be tired of life, as the term is, or they believe their life is completed. There's now actually a euthanasia kind of activism program called The Completed Life, where, okay, well, I've lived long enough and it's time to die. None of these people, by the way, get suicide prevention. None of the people in Oregon who ask for assisted suicide are given suicide prevention, even if they're in hospice. And I've been a hospice volunteer, and one of the major services that hospice is supposed to provide is suicide prevention if one of the patients becomes suicidal, because the idea is to find out what the cause is and help address it. And often people change their minds when they have a terminal illness, just like they can when they want to kill themselves because of a business failure. But this VSED is really insidious. Where that show went wrong is you can't starve you and dehydrate yourself to death without assistance. They had it so like the elderly woman, the patient, was able to stop eating and drinking and then collapsed and was found on the floor. It's an agonizing process. I mean, imagine being without food and water for 10 days or 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And so what somebody who is doing VSED usually has to have is a willing doctor to palliate the symptoms. So you'll put the patient, let's say, in with high medications of morphine or whatever, so that they can continue to kill themselves, which also may prevent them from changing their minds about killing themselves. Mm-hmm. But wait, it gets worse. Activists are now actually proposing that people who are diagnosed with dementia while they're still competent be able to write an advance directive saying that if I become incompetent, do not give me food and water. In other words, starve, dehydrate these people to death, even if they're not suffering, even if they may be happy. And as I said, this is a particular concern to me because my mother had Alzheimer's, and I went through that whole circumstance with my mother. In Netherlands and Belgium and soon in Canada, they can actually do that and receive a lethal injection. In this country, because you can't do a lethal injection, they're now proposing advanced directives that say don't give spoon feeding. And by the way, an advanced directive is supposed to decide whether one wants or doesn't want medical treatment. Spoon feeding is not medical treatment. Spoon feeding is humane care. Humane care like turning or keeping clean or keeping warm. So what they're actually trying to do is force caregivers, people who treat patients in skilled nursing facilities or assisted living facilities or at home, that to force them to starve someone to death. It's just absolutely reprehensible. And let me tell you about this case in the Netherlands, because once you've accepted killing as an answer to suffering, this is what happens to your sensitivities. There was a woman with Alzheimer's, and when she was competent, she created one of those advanced directives and said, listen, when I'm incompetent, I do want to be killed, but I want to be the one to say when. That's what her instructions were. She became incompetent. She's in a skilled nursing center or a nursing home. And the doctor and family say, well, she's just suffering too much. It's time for her to die. She never did. So the doctor and the family went to the nursing home, drugged her coffee. She fell asleep. They started the lethal injection and she woke up. And she was so upset that she was being killed, she started to fight to save her own life. The doctor instructed the family to hold her down and then finished dispatching her. She was told, at first the euthanasia authorities in the Netherlands said, well, that was right because it was good faith. When there was a huge international outcry, including articles by me, they decided to do a prosecution. Now, understand when it comes to euthanasia, in the Netherlands, a prosecution is never really intended to punish the person, but to set a precedent, to expand the practice. And so she went on trial. She was exonerated. This was, to me, a murder because it was clearly the woman wasn't consenting. And you weren't also supposed to drug somebody.
Yeah.
And the judge said, well, she was in good faith, wished her well. And then the parliament changed the law saying that in circumstances where an incompetent person is going to be euthanized, you can drug them and the doctor and family can decide. And so everything that was supposedly a protection, a guideline to protect against abuse, was blown to smithereens because that's how it works.
Yeah.
That is one of the most chilling stories of all. And it's like, oh, well, that's compassion. She didn't have a life worth living. She was fighting to save her life.
Yeah. No. Oh, it's yeah. I mean, it's awful. And, you know, when you talk about Hollywood and what's going on in popular culture, I mean, I was really shocked, you know, because how I came to this whole pro-life movement was through the Gosnell story. And, you know, it was very disturbing, the stuff that we discovered, the stuff we had to read, the evidence from the court case. And I remember at one stage, and you'll find this quite amusing. I almost feel like I might have told you this story before, Wesley, but I remember thinking, I need a break. I need to think about something totally different. And I went off for a big walk in the Hollywood Hills, listening to, I thought I'd listen to like a romantic book, you know, I'd go and just a fluffy book, you know, that would distract me. And you won't believe it, Leslie, like Wesley, what I chose to listen to. And I didn't know. Me Before You, sorry, Me Before You.
Yeah.
And so I'm listening to that. And it's like, it's great. You know,
actually, it should be called You Before. The proper thing is it should be You Before Me. But actually, the title didn't lie. It is Me Before Everyone Else.
So basically, I'm listening to it. And, you know, Wesley, you know the story of it. But basically, you know, this guy, he, you know, beautiful looking guy, very attractive, very accomplished, very successful. Bang, he's hit by a motorbike and he becomes a paraplegic. He's at home, he's very upset, obviously, he's very depressed. And then his mother discovers this girl to take care of him, who's kind of off the wall, kind of eccentric, quirky, whatever. And of course, you know, everyone knows where that's going, right? So this lovely love story, and it's great. And you're thinking, this is great. And this girl is so nice, and they're just so unusual, and they'd never have met. These two, who are this big love story, would never ever have met if it weren't for the terrible thing that happened to the guy. And you're rocking along, and I'm rocking along listening to this thinking, well, this is lovely. Until he says, you know, you really love me, you know, and if you really love me, you'll come to Switzerland, because that's my plan. I'm going to go and top myself. And I mean, I literally was with my mouth hanging open thinking, there's no way this is going where, you know, and I thought it was interesting, that book, by the way, they mentioned by name Dignitas, the company Dignitas, which is a for-profit business that deals in euthanasia, where they make a lot of money. And I wondered what the business relationship was between that book and the movie, the subsequent movie, and Dignitas. But just completely shocking. And I just thought that book was very much aimed to a younger audience, by the way, that kind of love those kind of romance. And the movie was very much geared towards a young audience. And I felt like the actual story makes no sense at all. It made, because I used to study literature and I taught literature. From a literature point of view, the story makes no sense because the characters involved wouldn't behave the way they behave. You know, you're meant to believe that he kills himself because he can't do any more extreme skiing. Like basically they put it down to that he looks at the extreme skis he used to have. Oh God, I can't live in a world where I can't do that. And you're meant to believe that it's all fine. And off he goes and he dispatches himself and leaves behind the love of his life. Did you happen to have to watch that at any point, Wesley?
No, I refused to watch it for the very reason that you described. And I should mention, because I didn't in our earlier discussion, that Switzerland allows assisted suicide. And they have suicide clinics where people fly. It's called suicide tourism. People fly from all over the world to be made dead. They fly there in first class and go home in the hold. And there have even been cases, for example, a woman from Italy who went to Switzerland and had assisted suicide at the clinic because she felt she was losing her looks. She was elderly and she was depressed because she had lost her looks. And the first the family learned about it was when they received her urn of ashes in the mail. I mean, that's how compassionate all of this stuff is. There's another movie called $1 Million Baby that has the same trajectory, and it's really awful because it's about this manager who manages a boxer. Clint Eastwood is the manager, and the boxer gets punched, a female boxer, and her neck is broken, and she becomes a quadriplegic, and she wants to be euthanized. Her family treats her terribly, and so forth. And I thought, you know, the real ending of that should have been, you know, Clint Eastwood saying, "No, we're gonna fight, kid. We're gonna fight. You beat the odds on boxing. You can beat the odds on this too. We're gonna fight." And you could have had an ending where she's a inspirational speaker or she's a teacher. Instead, they ended with her being euthanized. And you can see why disability rights activists are beside themselves with this, because every time almost there's a movie where there's somebody with a serious disability these days, the answer to that isn't to get independent living services. The answer isn't to get rehabilitation and keep moving. The answer is to be killed or to commit suicide. And yet, if you take a look at studies, you know, if somebody becomes quadriplegic, obviously they become very depressed. But 5 years later, when they've been given proper care, the level of depression among people with quadriplegia is no greater than the level in the general community.
Isn't there, I'm just, as you say that, by the way, because I'm trying to think, and I was going to ask you, how can you point to any examples in popular culture where that are positive of life? And I think, isn't there that amazing book about, tell me about that.
It's about a man who gets into a locked-in state. In a locked-in state, and it's a true story, I believe it's a true story. A locked-in state, you're fully conscious, but you can't communicate. And he learns to communicate with eye blinking and so forth. And that is a story about how he had a meaningful and a very happy life, even in that. And I don't like to use the term even because it'll upset people with disabilities. But for many people who aren't disabled, you look at that and say, "Oh my gosh, how I couldn't imagine living like that." But he was able to overcome those adversities and actually have a happy life. And they did make a movie out of it.
Yes.
But that's the only example that I can think of. I had a case, by the way, when I was a hospice volunteer. The last patient I ever had was a man who died of Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, also called motor neuron disease. And he told me that he became suicidal when he first got the diagnosis. And part of the reason, by the way, was he went to see his Catholic priest, and the priest was so wigged out, kind of ran away from him and had no time for him, which shows you the power of a priest to do harm as well as to do good.
Yes.
And so he quit the Catholic Church. He became very depressed. He wanted to go to Kevorkian. Jack Kevorkian at this time in the 90s was doing assisted suicides of mostly disabled people. Most of his people who he hooked up to a carbon monoxide canister were not terminally ill. Most were disabled and depressed. And my friend Bob wanted to go to Kevorkian, but his family wouldn't take him. His family refused. And as he put it to me later, at some point I came out of the fog. Those were his terms. And I was so glad to be alive. And Bob then spent the rest of his time he had living, as he called it, to the fullest.
That's amazing.
He wrote a book about, he wrote a memoir about his life and his circumstance. He wrote a piece for the San Francisco Chronicle called "I Don't Want a Choice to Die," because he said that was trying to force people like him out of the bright boulevards, that was the term he used, into the dark shadows. And I saw him. He changed his mind, even though he had one of the most feared diagnoses that we have, which is Lou Gehrig's disease. So, and by the way, he died peacefully in his sleep.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. We're coming to the end of the show, actually. We've just got about 5 minutes. And two additional questions we ask everyone, which moves kind of, may move away from all of this a little, certainly.
Yeah, let's you see why I'm so much fun at parties.
Exactly.
Let's lighten the load.
Let's lighten the load a little bit. The first question maybe is a segue, actually, is a good segue. What a piece of art that is inspirational and important to you?
Art. Can that include a book?
Yes.
All right. I tend to what is important to me tends to be history, as opposed to particularly art, although I love art, obviously, Van Gogh and so forth. But I read a history book that really impacted me called Arguing About Slavery. And it's about the early abolition movement from the 1830s, 1840s, particularly focusing on John Quincy Adams and his work as an abolitionist in the United States Congress. Abolitionism is kind of a passion. I read about Lincoln, I read about the abolitionists, All on Fire, William Lloyd Garrison's biography and so forth. But arguing about slavery really had a powerful impact.
Yeah. We have the book, we have it in on our bookshelf.
Yes, somebody should read it now.
No, I've read it.
Very good.
But it's a long story. We were very interested
and also,
in slavery.
It's very good. To Kill a Mockingbird, which I read in high school, impacted me a great deal because of the Atticus character, standing up for the African American wrongly accused of rape. And that went along with the idea of an attorney standing alone against powerful forces because it's the right thing to do. So To Kill a Mockingbird also impacted me.
And as you know, our last question is cooking. A recipe question. Do you cook, Wesley? And if you cook, what do you cook that everyone likes?
Well, I cook scrambled eggs, but beyond that, mostly my wife's a very good cook. But during the summer, we have barbecues, and I do the barbecuing. And I have I do chicken and steak and that kind of thing. But I do one meal or one side dish that people really like. I get very fresh corn on the cob, and one for each guest. And I melt butter, and then I salt the butter, and I baste the corn in the butter so that the corn is really saturated with butter. I wrap it in aluminum foil, each ear, and then I barbecue it, and people love it. So every time that I barbecue, I make my special corn on the cob.
Oh, very good. Okay, well, I hope we get to sample it one of these days. Wesley, thank you so much for your time today. I think we could talk for a lot longer, by the way.
Well, I appreciate the work you guys do, and if you're ever in the Washington D.C. area, call me, and we'll do corn on the cob.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. Okay, thanks, Wesley.
Thanks, Wesley.
Thank you.
Well, that was a great interview.
Yes.
And I'm really glad. I think we need to get Wesley on again. He has a funded knowledge on this issue and on many others.
Yeah.
But yeah, very disturbing. Very disturbing.
So
stuff.
what next?
Do you want to tell us something about
Andrew Cuomo.
your favorite film, the governor,
the next president of the United States.
Well, I think now Governor Cuomo is maybe on his last legs politically. What's the latest, Phelim?
Well, just to remind you that Governor Cuomo, that the left are throwing him under the bus, not because they know he's a granny killer. And the media are throwing him under the bus too, because the media covered up his granny killing. Yes. Actually, that's the important thing. They all covered up his granny killing, and now the granny killing's coming out. So they're going, how can we get rid of him without making us look like censorious hypocrites? So they're going big on the sexual harassment and
Me Too,
the Me Too stuff. And I happen to have some knowledge of his latest accuser. But just to recap, there have been, I think there was a couple more the weekend. I think there's 6 now in total. But some of the accusations are. Can
I interrupt you for 1 minute and just say something kind of funny that I saw? I mean, not to make light of people accusing people of sexual harassment, but I saw a very funny meme where somebody said we're two sexual harassment accusers away from a full opening up of indoor dining in New York, which I thought was very, very naughty. And obviously, I shared it with you because after the Wesley interview, I think we need a little cheering up. Well,
it's very much like Gavin Newsom, actually. We're 100,000 recall signatures away from all schools being open.
Yes.
It's exactly the same.
Yes.
So, a lot of it is, him talking inappropriately in offices and asking 25-year-old women, and he's 60-something, would you date a 60-year-old? And creepy, awful, crappy stuff like that, which, and then there's one allegation of forcible kissing, which if it happened is, he should be thrown out immediately.
Yes.
And then there's some incident at a wedding, and it's all not very nice, and it's all.
I have to say, and I've asked younger people about this, but I thought when he asked someone, "Can I kiss you?" at a wedding. Back in the day, I went to weddings specifically because I wanted someone to say, "Can I kiss you?"
Yeah, but I remember you talking about some of the creepier older men's weddings.
Yes, that's true.
It's not nice.
No, it's not nice. No, you're right. No,
there's
a difference. There is a difference, actually. You're right.
There is, and you know what? It's when it's the governor. Actually, it's particularly not nice because, you know, your brother-in-law's father doing it is kind of, oh, go away, right? But when it's the governor, right, and you're trying to move forward in the world. So anyway,
so who's Karen Hinton?
Who's Karen Hinton? So Karen Hinton, yes. So Karen Hinton, actually, how do you know Karen Hinton's a liar? Because her lips are moving, basically.
Oh.
But how do I know she's a liar? So back, you may remember back in the ancient past, about 3 weeks ago, the original allegations about Cuomo was that he was a bully. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. Yes, and then it moved into sexual harassment. So when it said he was a bully, and that congressman, that state representative, the Asian guy, the Korean guy, whose name I can't remember, said he was a bully and described in detail the bullying on the phone, I will destroy you. Karen Hinton, who's a former spokesperson of Cuomo, who then fell out with Cuomo and went to work for de Blasio, she said, yes, I have experienced this bullying and I confirm that he's a bully. Right, and it's like, okay. Then the allegations moved on to sexual harassment. And guess what? Karen Hinton has now remembered that she was sexually harassed by him too.
She'd forgotten it earlier.
Yeah, she just failed to mention it. So basically she is his political enemy, because she was a political ally, went to work for his arch enemy, Bill de Blasio, who's another communist. Okay. But for some reason they hate each other in some kind of factional dispute. A, she's his political enemy. B, she didn't remember that he was involved in sexual harassment 3 weeks ago when she wanted him fired for being a bully. Now she claims the sexual harassment was an overlong hug after she went to meet him to try and patch up their fractious relationship, and at the end he gave her an overlong hug. Yeah, maybe he did, but it's amazing she didn't remember this 3 weeks ago. However, Karen Hinton is also the spokesperson for Stephen Donziger. Huh. Who is Stephen Donziger? All right. Stephen Donziger is the person who was at the center of my play, the $18 billion prize, and who has been found by a New York court and several other courts, by the way, most recently the appeals court in New York, for being a fraudster who bribed an Ecuadorian judge and paid him $500,000 to find against Chevron for $18 billion, and Donziger was set to profit $1.2 billion from that.
Nice work if you can get it.
Donziger is facing criminal contempt charges for failing to hand over phones and computers and documents to help find out the truth, more truth behind this story. You'll remember, he sued Chevron for polluting the rainforest on behalf of indigenous people, and then, bribed the judge. So she was his spokesperson. Now, you're entitled to be a spokesperson for everyone. The worst person definitely is entitled to a spokesperson. Not like a lawyer, right? It's not some kind of human right, but you're allowed to be a spokesperson. But I know that she has gone beyond being a spokesperson. She is involved in spinning and disseminating false allegations for a fraudster. She is misrepresenting what has been found out against this guy. She's misrepresenting the case against him. She is lying about the evidence.
Give us an example.
Well, she refuses to. For example, he is on the record in secret emails condemning the Ecuadorian government and saying to the Ecuadorian government, don't clean up that mess. Because if you do, people will see, it costs very little to clean it up, and B, it means we'll get less money from Chevron, because we're charging them hundreds of millions per little bit of mess, and if you clean it up for a few thousand, that will destroy, the liability that Chevron has. And then another thing, he was secretly funding an independent NGO called Amazon Watch. He was funding them, and Amazon Watch were condemning Chevron, vociferously and supporting him, and it turns out he was writing their press releases. She knows all this. Also, he was secretly funding the judge and said it was just part of the culture. She knows all this, but deliberately misrepresents the evidence against him. So, forgive me. I think I've come around. I think what Governor Cuomo did definitely goes to the level of sexual harassment. If it's true. But I have to say, Karen Hinton is the last person on the planet who you'd want. I mean, it's terrible that between Governor Cuomo and Karen Hinton, I have to make a choice, right? But I have to say, the person I'd least believe in this situation is one Karen Hinton.
But as we said last week, the more egregious thing here isn't, I think, because obviously the sexual harassment thing hasn't been investigated, we're not 100% sure what's happened, and the liability, the truthfulness of anyone on any side, whatever, all of that has to be checked out. What we do know, however, is that President Trump sent the Mercy ship up to New York, which sat in the harbour empty. We know that President Trump organised that the Javits Centre would have a huge amount of resources spent on it so that it would be ready to receive patients who might be needing to quarantine before they went back into general population, as it were. And instead of taking advantage of these, extremely expensive interventions by President Trump for what it certainly appears like for political reasons, Cuomo instead sent people who had COVID back into nursing homes, guaranteeing that tens of thousands of people would have died there that didn't need to. And that New York, if taken as a country, has one of the worst death rates for COVID on the planet Earth. And that's the story that the media, as you kind of said very clearly, Phelim, at the beginning, that's the story that they don't want to highlight or cover because they ignored it at the time.
One thing I do know, though, is that Governor Cuomo has been kind of hoisted by his own petard. I was trying to think of some kind of other thing he could be hoisted by there, but let's not go there.
Petard
so it used to be the bar in New York for being declared a hostile workplace, right? The law was, a hostile workplace, which is an actual legal phrase, and you can be fined and et cetera, et cetera. It was that the sexual suggestiveness, sexual suggestiveness is part of a hostile workplace, but it has to be severe and pervasive. Mm-hmm. However, that was changed recently, and under the new under the new law, that the harassment is actionable if it merely subjects an employee to inferior terms, conditions, or privileges of employment, right? So it doesn't matter how severe or pervasive your harassment is, but if, as what happened with Cuomo, he made suggestions to a lady and she felt uncomfortable, and as part of the deal she was moved to another place. Mm-hmm. And guess who was the champion of this new bill?
Cuomo.
Governor Andrew Cuomo.
I won the prize.
Yeah, so he actually ended up...
foisted on his own petard.
Yes.
That's
foisted.
Very good. Hoisted on his own petard.
Hoisted his own leotard. Did I ever tell you about my use of that? I used that phrase once in an article, hoisted by his own leotard.
That's a story for another day, perhaps, Phelim.
Jan Syriac, who...
tennis player.
Who recently hit the headlines saying that Serena Williams was past it.
Whoa.
Yes, that she was...
I think we met him once in his house, didn't we?
Oh, yeah, we did, yeah.
Okay.
The Romanian billionaire who...
Back in the day.
Who was hoisted by his own leotard.
When Phelim and I lived in Bucharest for 7 years. That's a story for another day. So a couple of last stories today, because we're running out of time here.
Oh, actually, when I was... we had a little break there. When I was gone, I managed to find my copy of the book Arguing About Slavery.
Oh yeah,
from Wesley talked about. Look,
which even has
notations.
very impressive notations, Phelim.
Yes.
You'd recommend it?
Well, I put the notes in, but I didn't put little stickers. Yeah. I was looking at it at the time, just for a particular purpose. We were doing a project at the time, and I wanted to see what arguments people would have for slavery. I was very interested in the idea that
there was actually an argument, that there were people debating this.
Yes. So
are we moving on?
Yes. But it's just to show.
Exhibit A.
Ahead of the crowd. Okay.
That's Phelim. And we have a very nice letter. I'm going to call it a postcard from New Mexico from the Klauses. Kathy Klaus.
Actually, it's Kathy Claus. I wonder does she get funny letters,
Is that how you spell Santa Claus?
Yes, Claus, Magda, isn't that right? Yes, it is. She's nodding.
So this is Kathy Klaus, who has been living in New Mexico and has been a frequent listener and viewer of the podcast, and we love you. And we love the two of you in New Mexico. But guess what, Phelim? The Santa Clauses, are moving to Lubbock, Texas.
To the North Pole.
They're not moving to the North Pole. That's so funny, Phelim. And I bet they've heard that joke more than once, by the way.
I bet you they've never heard it. Here
comes
Santa Claus, here comes Santa Claus, right down the Lubbock Lane.
So here's the letter from Kathy Santa Claus. So hi, it's Kathy Klaus here, and we love your podcasts, you see, that's why I included that line. And listen each week. Now that we've endured basically, and this is a COVID story basically, basically a year of this, things are not getting better in the land of enchantment, or as we like to say, the land of disenchantment. She lives in New Mexico.
Is that the state motto, land of enchantment? Sounds like it, okay.
Our governor insists that we should wear masks even when taking a walk or if biking in the wilderness. It is, of course, science. The week before Thanksgiving, she decreed that any business, no matter the size, which had 4 cases or positive tests, should close for 14 days. Of course, that meant that grocery stores with 4 positive results had to shut down. That meant that many towns were left with only one place to shop. People were driving from southeast New Mexico to buy groceries and get prescriptions filled by a store in the same chain as the ones closed down. Not only that, but for a couple of weeks, I believe, she limited big box stores such as Costco to 75 people at a time. It was pretty cold in the mornings when people were queuing up to get into the shop for Christmas, which we weren't to celebrate. And it gets worse, according to Kathy. Our daughter's mother-in-law died last Thursday. Not of COVID, but of a lingering illness which was badly managed. God help her. Thank God she was finally transferred to a hospice the day before she died, so her husband, son and daughter were able to see her and pray with her and tell her they loved her. But because she supposedly had COVID, according to a test a month before she died, they allegedly tested again. They say she still had it, even though she had no symptoms of it. We're expecting the death certificate will list COVID as the cause of death.
Of course it will.
So by governor's orders, because she supposedly died of or with COVID, she can't be buried for 14 days. How does an embalmed body cause a danger to anyone? It is this kind of heavy-handedness, plus the anti-oil and small business in general, which has led us to purchase a house in Lubbock, Texas. We've been there.
I've been there.
We close, God willing, on the 18th of March, our anniversary. Thanks be to God. We thought you'd like to check out the reasons Governor Michelle Lejeune Grisham is called the White Witch of Santa Fe, where it's always winter and never Christmas. And this is coming from the Clauses, as in Santa Claus. So they are in a position to be saying that, right?
They might be experts on...
They would be experts now.
On Christmas.
She loves power and has taken this state from one with a great surplus in the treasury to one which is broke and voted the worst state in the country as far as education, poverty, homelessness, and much more. We've just passed an abortion law which has no protections for conscience or to keep girls and women from being trafficked or used by whomever. Abortion is enshrined into the New Mexico Constitution now. So if you ever want to visit one of the friendliest towns in the country, come to Lubbock sometime and we'll host you. By the way, can't wait to try the chicken and garlic sometime when the house is moved and I have a fully working kitchen for the chicken. And by the way, a lot of people are talking to me about the chicken recipe, and rightfully so.
There's been a lot of talk about that.
And then she says, take care of yourselves and please keep putting out such awesome content. We tell everyone we know to listen to your podcast. God bless and keep you both. You're brave and admirable. That's us, Phelim. Kathy and Chris Klaus.
I think to be fair, they should actually move somewhere
closer to us.
No, it snows in the winter. They're going to call it Claus.
And by the way, I will tell you that my one memory of Lubbock, Texas, and you'll remember this, Phelim, is we went to a wedding in Lubbock, Texas, and during a break, during the proceedings, during the party, we all got guns and got to go shooting randomly in the middle of nowhere.
And
Isn't that correct?
I went shooting with a Hollywood star.
A Hollywood star.
Who plays a superhero.
That's enough. Go on ahead.
And boy, was he a useless shot.
And another thing that happened, by the way, on that trip was that we went on a boating trip during that trip. Right. And I don't know how to tell this delicately, but let's just put it this way. During that boating trip, some of the guests at the wedding...
suffered an injury.
Well, no, they went on those zims. What do you call them?
The superhero went on a...
Not the superhero.
No, the superhero was driving.
Maybe. Anyway.
Superhero was driving a jet ski.
What's this called?
A jet ski.
And his friend fell off the back of
his friend, who's also an actor, but not as well known.
Not as well known. Fell off the back. Wasn't quite well known, actually.
Quite well known.
Fell off the back of said jet ski and...
I didn't know what this was.
It's apparently a thing, but he hurt his bottom very badly. I think that's enough.
Wait,
he hurt his bottom badly and had to have...
He didn't... It's not
had to have
his
stitches.
bottom.
It's to do with his bottom. That's enough. I'm not going to go any further than that. That's all I'm going to say. If you want to be in touch, we can tell you more. But anyway, that was enough from the clauses. So we have been to look up...
Write in the comments if you want to know more. I think...
No. We have been to Lubbock, Texas, and what else?
Birthplace of Buddy Holly.
I was going to say birthplace of somebody. And what did what's his name? Elvis Presley not have something to do with Lubbock, Texas?
No, that's Tupelo, Mississippi.
Oh, that's Tupelo, which we've also been to, into an awful hotel. Do you remember? We stayed in an awful hotel in Tupelo, Mississippi.
Did we?
Yeah, pretty bad.
Very nice people there.
Oh, very nice people there.
Or were those people who had the radio station or whatever?
Oh, those lovely people.
Yeah.
Or maybe the awful hotel actually was in Lubbock then. I feel like it's one of those places we stayed in an awful hotel.
I don't think Tupelo.
I want to finish off by quickly going to the recipe of the week, and very important that we get to the recipe of the week. And the recipe of the week is, and this is kind of a funny one because
recipe. Go ahead.
Recipe of the week, which is red lentil and lemon soup. It's a great recipe, but it's also a salutary lesson because
follow the recipe.
To follow the lesson, there's a lesson in this. But anyway, it'll be up on the website, the ingredients. But here's what you do. You get your nice big Dutch oven and you add 3 big tablespoons of olive oil into that pot.
People mightn't know what a Dutch oven is.
People know what a Dutch oven is who listen to this show, Philip, because I use it all the time.
Oh, okay.
And it is a Le Creuset Dutch oven, and I know it's a rather expensive, but you can get cheaper versions of it, and I actually think it's an heirloom. It's the kind of thing that people inherit off you because they last forever and they're gorgeous. Okay, and you bought me a second one because the first one's got a little spoiled by a life, I suppose. So I have 2 of them actually on the go. Could give away one of them, I suppose.
No, don't.
I'm not. Okay, I draw 3 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil to the bottom of that pan, and heat that up on high. Add onions and garlic and cook until golden, about 3 minutes. I keep them moving and make sure they don't burn. Stir in tomato paste, cumin, salt, black pepper, and a pinch. This is where the salutary lesson comes in.
Read the recipe.
A pinch of chili powder or cayenne, salt, pepper, and fry for 2 minutes. Add the stock and the water, lentils, and a couple of carrots. 3 carrots, I think I put in. Bring to a simmer, then partly cover the pot. Turn the heat down to medium-low. Simmer until the lentils are soft, about 30 minutes. Then use an immersion blender, which, by the way, I think is one of the most handy things you could ever have in a kitchen. And drop that in. Don't totally blend the whole soup. Blend bits of it, because you want some nice lumpy bits. And it's great. And then you can taste it if it needs more seasoning. There's 2 things I want to say here. And at the very, very end of the recipe, when it's finished...
A big squeeze of lemon juice.
Give a big squeeze of lemon juice. There's 2 things I want to say about this. The first one that's kind of funny is that at the beginning of the pandemic, I don't know if you were like me, but you had that thing where you thought there'll be no food anywhere. We're all going to start looking at each other's spouses and thinking, well, you've got more weight on than me. Maybe I could cut a piece off and eat it or whatever. Not that I would have thought like that, even slightly. The cats would have gone first, Philip. I can't even imagine that happening now. We wouldn't take away that thought. Here's a photograph of the cats now.
Oh, you're sitting in our chairs?
Here they are sitting in our chairs, the podcast. It's not a fabulous photograph. So everyone was panicked, thought there would be no food and all that. And you remember there was no yeast. You couldn't get yeast. You couldn't get flours. You couldn't make bread. But I thought pulses. I thought lentils. Need to get lentils. So I bought a really large bag of red lentils, which have remained unmolested since. Like literally, I didn't open the packet until literally last week. That's a year into the pandemic. And lentils are very, very nice, and they're very, very versatile, and obviously they're full of iron and all kinds of good things. So here's the other salutary lesson. Here's the salutary lesson.
Follow the recipe.
Follow the recipe, and don't be trying to be just a bit loose about things.
Thinking, sure, a bit of
this and a bit of that. So instead of putting a pinch of cayenne into this recipe, I put a heaped teaspoon.
No, I believe it was a tablespoon.
No, it was a heaped teaspoon. Trust me, I know. If it was a tablespoon, Phil, we'd all be dead. I put it. So basically, here's the thing. I actually like hot food. I can eat it, and I've eaten a bowl of this soup, and it's yummy. Phil, can't eat it because he can't do the big spicy things.
Well, no, come on. I think most people could eat it. And word of warning: if you are cooking, and the name of the food is not super spicy. whoppadoodle.
Yeah, super sweaty.
Yeah, and you're in the kitchen and you're cooking, and you are literally choking because of the spiciness. And if you're literally sneezing, that might be a little what we call a red flag.
Well, I thought what happened was that I sniffed the cayenne pepper to kind of make sure that it was fresh because I hadn't opened it for a while. And then I thought I got some up my nose, and I did sneeze an awful lot. And I thought and then you started coughing. So that's how much cayenne pepper was put into the soup. By the way, the soup is delicious. Yeah. I'd use it in highly. I would use it over and over again. You just don't want to have as much cayenne as I put into it. But it's a great recipe.
No, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful taste for me, though, unfortunately, with the large amount of cayenne pepper.
Was the problem. But it was one of the reason I found this recipe actually, I've made a couple of changes to it, but basically it's a recipe from the New York Times. It's one of the highest rated recipes they had. And I think what's great about it is it's incredibly simple to produce. One thing that you can do, by the way, at the end, and I didn't have coriander, is if you had fresh coriander, chop that up and drop that on the top of the soup before serving. You could also serve it with a dollop of cream, particularly if you overdid the cayenne. But it's a really, really great soup and people really love it. And by the way, next week we have a fabulous recipe that you will not want to miss involving chocolate. It's really good. We made it once this week and I was so anxious to get it out of the oven that I took it out of the oven too quickly and it collapsed.
Yes.
So hopefully we'll have perfected it by next week.
Yes.
So that's enough for this week. That's enough for this week. We've come to the end of the show.
Yes.
Next week's a very, very big week. Not only because next week is the launch of the big Hunter Biden project, and you might want to go to unreportedstorysociety.com, sign up for the updates because you'll be the first to find out what it's all about. But also next week is St. Patrick's Day. And actually, maybe I don't do the chocolate recipe next week then. Actually, I probably have to do, in fact, you know what? All the food next week will be Irish.
A token Irish project.
We'll move the chocolate to the following week.
So
we'll have St. Patrick, dear saint of our isle, on us thy poor children bestow a sweet smile. And now thou art high in the mansions above. Hail, glorious Saint Patrick, dear saint of our
look down
isle. Look down with. We might get the words of that as well for next week.
Yes.
And we might get it, just sing it properly. So that's enough from us. Talk to you next week. Thanks so much for all the lovely messages and all the lovely notes. Keep them coming.